coming. My name is Alki Iliopoulou. I'm the director of the Harvard Decision Science Lab. This talk is with Cass Sunstein. He's a professor at the law school. He's the famous author of the book Nudge, and there's a new one. Cass, what's the name of the new book coming up?
Too Much Information is the new book.
Too Much Information. We're gonna hear more about it today as well. And the talk is sponsored by the Harvard Kennedy School Alumni Association of New England and the Harvard Club of Merrimack. So I've graduated from HKS in 2017, and I'm part of the board. And so I'm gonna pass it on to Stuart to say hello to his folks and then start the discussion with Cass.
Thank you, Alki. I'm Stuart Pesco. I'm the president of the Harvard Club of Merrimack Valley. I want to welcome our members and the Merrimack Valley alum and from our brother and sister clubs on the North Shore and Harvard Club in Concord. This is the second of our coordinated events with Alki and the Harvard Decision Science Lab. And we're going to keep doing this, we hope. We hope to be able to do this throughout the year. Don't know if we'll get as many people as famous as Cass to do our sessions, but greatly looking forward to what you have to say today, Cass. And maybe at the end, we'll talk about some possible future uses of this wonderful tool, Zoom, to educate and entertain our alumni out in the suburbs. So again, Cass, thank you. Welcome to everybody. Back to you, Alki.
All right, thank you, Stuart. All right, we're gonna hear Cass talk for about half an hour, and you guys can add questions in the Q&A or chat. If you have anything, I'm gonna be moderating, and then we're gonna answer everything at the end of the session when Cass is ready. And you can also feel free to raise your hand, and I can have you talk after the end of Cass's talk. Right, thank you, Cass. We're all ears.
Okay, so thanks everybody for being here. This is the perfect topic and the perfect time for the topic. Not the perfect time, but the perfect time for the topic. And the reason is that in Germany, in Denmark, in the United Nations, in the World Health Organization, in New Zealand, in Australia, and in many other places, behavioral economics and behavioral science and nudging are getting more attention than they really ever have in terms of pragmatics. And COVID-19 is responsible for this. And the reason is that, as we're seeing with some not terrific data from the United States, human behavior is at the heart of the effort to confront COVID-19. So whether or not we have mandates in place, if the kind of advised thing to do is to wear a mask or to stay home or to wash your hands a lot or not to have play dates for your kids or to maintain social distance, we're dealing in all of those cases with human behavior, and the law can be brought into bear. There can be fines. That might be a good thing. It might not be a good thing. But human behavior often doesn't completely follow the law. So what people want to do and what they're willing to do are essential to our efforts to save lives. So while the talk is going to have a certain degree of lightness because there's real fun in behavioral science, the stakes are super high. We're talking about getting a lot of deaths possibly, or not that many. Choose your pick with respect to the country, and smart behavioral strategies can be essential. I'm going to do the remarks in the following way. I'm going to talk a little bit about the birth of nudging in behavioral science. Then I'm going to go right at the problem of COVID-19 by talking first about nudges and then about sludge. And the countries that have done well, New Zealand, Taiwan, and Australia are three, have used nudging and behavioral science to great effect. Okay, let's start, shall we, in the 1970s. And notice that at the Kennedy School, at Harvard's economics department, basically in public policy shops all over the world, there was an intuition, pretty simple, which is human beings respond to incentives. So if you want to get people to do something, let's say eat healthier or exercise more or take medicines, the thing to do is to alter their incentives. And that's because people are basically rational. What emerged in the 1970s was a body of work from some intrepid adventurers, let's call them, the Christopher Columbus of the 1970s, who went on a trip to America, and the trip was the human mind. And the basic idea is that human beings aren't irrational, that would be unkind as well as false, but are imperfectly rational. So we know that human beings focus on today and tomorrow often, and not the distant future. Call it present bias, even if the distant future is like 5 years from now and their future selves are at risk. We know that human beings on average are unrealistically optimistic. That is, even smokers think that they're less likely to get lung cancer and heart disease than the average non-smoker. 90% of drivers think that they are safer than the average driver, and 100% of people think that their sense of humor is better than the average sense of humor. That's funny, yes? It's a little bit funny? Okay, so there's optimistic bias, there's present bias. Human beings suffer or benefit from inertia, that changing from what they're doing is often not going to happen, even if it's the case that changing from what they're doing is like really important for their economics or their health. We know that human beings don't do great with risks. Sometimes if they can think of an example, they'll get really scared because let's say there was a theft in the neighborhood, or if they can't think of an example, they'll be really complacent, even if the risk is actually high. So that suggests that people are often excessively scared and excessively complacent. We know also that people hate losses. They hate losses more than they like equivalent gains. So when people are told, you're gonna get $20, they'll smile, but they'll frown more than they would smile in response to that question if they're told you're gonna lose $20. So what I basically outlined are principal findings in behavioral economics and behavioral science. There have been a bunch of Nobel Prizes awarded for this work, which shows in a very disciplined way the specific ways in which people depart from standard thinking about rationality. Now, our time machine is going to get a little less gasoline in it, and we're going to go to the 1990s, not the 1970s. And notice that starting around 1995, roughly, people started thinking, oh, how does this material bear on public policy if we're thinking about safety or health or the environment or discrimination or poverty? And that's where it started. And one idea that emerged has a terrible name. The idea is libertarian paternalism. And notwithstanding the awfulness of the name, the idea is there are tools which doctors can use, which parents can use, which employers can use, which governments can use, which maintain freedom of choice. So they're libertarian, but they are also going to steer people in certain directions, directions that the designer of the tool thinks best, which means there's some paternalism involved. Now it's going to be modest paternalism and libertarian paternalism. A GPS device is a defining example. That is, with a GPS device, you tell it where you want to go, where you want to end up, and you can change that. It's up to you, the preferred destination, and you can also ignore its advice. So the GPS might say, take this route. You might say, there's a route I prefer, or that's scenic, or that's kind of sentimental to me, so I'm going to do that. And in that way, you are free to reject the paternalism that the GPS offers. Okay, if we think of the GPS as libertarian, but also paternalistic, we can use another word, nudging. And we can say that private and public institutions often can and often do nudge people like a GPS. That is, they steer people in a certain direction, but they do it in a way that maintains freedom of choice. And starting in around 2008, now the time travel machine isn't a very good time travel machine, it just has a decade plus window, we're seeing governments all over the world starting to do nudging. And in the United Kingdom and in the United States, in a simple example, people are automatically enrolled in pension plans. They can opt out if they want. Or in Germany, people are automatically enrolled in green energy. They can opt out if they want. Or in workplaces all over the world, people are automatically given double-sided printing, but if they want single-sided, they can do that. An example from this country, the United States, 15 million children at last count were enrolled in automatic programs for free school meals. Poor kids who are eligible, they're in. They don't have to sign up. Before the automatic enrollment, when they had to sign up, a lot of those 15 million weren't in because, remember, inertia is an important, powerful force, and people just didn't sign up. In Sweden, there's a program called Vision Zero, which is doing a great deal to cut deaths on the highway, and it uses libertarian paternalism in part to steer people away from dangerous driving habits. Okay, think of nudging as an assortment of tools which all preserve freedom, but which include the default rule. What happens if you do nothing? That benefits from inertia. Or a reminder, which will often help counteract unrealistic optimism, meaning reminder, go to the doctor. Or a invocation of a social norm, which says most people these days are buckling their seatbelts or not using their cell phone when they're driving. Don't you want to be like most people? That sometimes, not always, but that sometimes is very effective. Or information like a calorie label. When you buy food, there's a calorie label at McDonald's and Subway, and there's some data suggesting that's having a quite meaningful effect on behavior. And it's also the case that warnings can be nudges, like this has peanuts in it. If you're allergic, stay away. Or this has shrimp. If you're allergic, stay away. These are all nudges. Okay, now let's go to COVID-19 and notice that in some places there are mandates and prohibitions. Certain businesses have to close. People have to stay home. They have to wear masks. And in other places, there's advisories, let's say, about what you're supposed to do. Okay. How do you get people to do that? Harvard is going to open in part, at least this fall, and there's a lot of stuff that students should be doing. How do you get them to do it? And the question that behavioral science puts on the table is, which kinds of nudges are effective? For COVID-19, near the place from which I'm speaking are a bunch of stores which are now open, which have clear social distancing markers on the floor. That is, they show you what 6 feet is. And it's just marked there. This is one place to stand, here's another place to stand. It's 6 feet away. That is clearly a nudge. In various places in New Zealand, which has, it looks like, kicked the COVID-19 problem, the Prime Minister has had a campaign called Be Kind. And one of the points of the Be Kind campaign is, don't make other people sick. And that's an effort to use a nudge to try to encourage people to engage in healthier behavior. Instagram, which is well aware of behavioral science, has had a stay home sticker where you can add stories to your stay home choice in places where staying home is indicated, and that can be go viral. Okay, this is a little abstract. The United Kingdom has adopted a framework for behavior change strategies, which has an acronym. I'm going to tell you the framework and elaborate a little bit, and I'm going to tell you my amendment to the framework. The framework is called EAST, and it says if you want people to do something, make it easy, make it attractive, make it social, and make it timely. Word to the wise at Princeton or Harvard or any university that's opening in part, keep the East framework in mind. Of these four, East is probably the most important. And the insight here is when people aren't doing something, it's often tempting to think, how do we push them, get them to do it? But it's smarter often to think, why aren't they doing it anyway? And remove the obstacle. So if people aren't wearing masks, is it because it's hard to find masks? Or because it's socially unacceptable to wear masks? Or because masks are uncomfortable? Or because people think that the signal of wearing a mask is, I'm sick, or I'm scared, or I'm capitulating to an elite? If those are the reasons, then we can address those reasons and take them away. Timely, the T in East, is especially important because it often matters where people are being nudged and when they're being nudged, more than that they're being nudged. So if you're told at 11 o'clock at night, you're going to sleep, maintain social distance, that's not an ideal time. If you're told when you're entering a store, maintain social distance, that's timely. Okay, I would give pride of place second only to easy in East, to social. And here the basic idea is social norms are extremely impactful, and people are often deeply influenced by their perception first of what most people are doing, and second, their perception of what people are increasingly doing or starting to do. And let's linger a little bit, shall we, over the S in East, and say that whether people do something that involves their health often depends on whether the thing attaches it well or poorly to their understanding of their identity. So where I'm speaking from right now, which is Concord, Massachusetts, kind of life in the last week suggests if you go around without a mask, you are signaling something about yourself that you don't want to signal. And your identity as an upstanding member of the community, more or less, is jeopardized if you walk around that way. You look like you're making some kind of statement, which is antisocial or rebellious or hostile. And most people, not all, but most people don't want to make that statement. And so they might wear masks even if otherwise they wouldn't. But in many places in the United States, if you wear a mask, you're saying, you know, I'm not one of you. We're you's the people in the community. I'm one of them. Or I'm sick. Or I'm a terrified person. Or I'm not a real, pick your identity. Maybe it's a real resident of the state. Now, for social, the importance of identity and self-understanding really is brought home, so to speak, by a brilliant campaign in Texas, which in the 1980s was very concerned about littering and wanted to stop it. They wanted to have a nudge to reduce it. And what they chose was a slogan called, "Don't mess with Texas." Now that's brilliant. It means that if you litter, you are not capitulating to some self-appointed Eastern or Northern elite. It meant instead you're messing with your state. And Texans who are proud of their state and its, beauty and amazingness don't like to be told, litter bug, shame on you. But it resonates with them if they're told, don't mess with Texas. We could, with respect to COVID-19, build on that successful nudge in the states in which people aren't doing what it's in their interest to do by nudging them in a way that attaches itself tightly to their identity. Now, like a professor, I'm ashamed to say I'm talking abstractly, but in Montana, this is exactly what they've been doing in the last days of the crisis, where they've been saying things about Montanans do this, Montanans do that, and directly linking one's pride in one's state and one's identity as a citizen of Montana with wearing a mask. They've gone hard at that. Okay, there's one other wrinkle to the framework. So the EAST framework, which is a framework for behavior change and nudging, with an emphasis on E and S, has been extremely effective in multiple nations in encouraging healthy behavior, to the point where the curve has been in these nations not just bent, but flattened. The amendment, the additional point, is that something missing, which is the emotional state of the person who's being nudged. And so the friendly amendment is to add the word F to EAST and to call it feast. The idea here is that often people are more likely to do something different from what they've been doing is if they find it fun, if there's a smile or a nod of the head associated with it. New Zealand, again, our behavior change experts, has been really good at that, with the Prime Minister saying, you know what, we're going to have to be locked down, but I'm going to give an exemption to the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny. They have an exemption. She actually said that in a press conference, and basically everyone was laughing. And they were thinking, you know, it's a grim situation in many ways, but the human inclination to smile and laugh is retained. In Taiwan, which has also done very well with COVID-19, part of their campaign, and Taiwan and New Zealand both have nudge experts associated closely with the government, in the government. In Taiwan, the health minister has said, humor, not rumor. And fun has been part of her program. And while, again, a pandemic isn't a whole lot of fun, to have fun with it is something that human beings are eminently capable of. And it turns out to be part of the secret sauce of non-grim success stories in many nations that are doing much better than the United States. Emotions are often contagious. And if a national leader is making a joke or turning something in a direction that wasn't anticipated, but it's a little bit funny, it goes a long way at building a sense of teamwork. The New Zealand effort has in it not only occasional fun, I think the effort's over now, by the way, they've done it, but also the phrase everywhere, be kind. That's been their expression. And that's a way of triggering a social norm in favor of not hurting other people by endangering them. Okay, what we've talked about now is the nudge program, which is being used all over the world for safety, health, the environment, poverty reduction, employment, and anti-discrimination policy, even part of the war on terror in various parts of the world. I'm going to shift gears a little now to discuss something that's newer. Not a new problem, but a new term and a new category. And I hope this will resonate with everyone's experience. Most countries are pervaded by sludge, understood as administrative burdens or frictions, which prevent us from getting where we want to go. So you can think of sludge as paperwork, waiting time, forms that are baffling, that make it hard, maybe to get a license, maybe to get a permit, maybe to get a visa, maybe to get benefits to which you're entitled, maybe to get some educational opportunity. I'm doing a little book, I confess, on sludge, and I just did some research on student visa sludge, and it is massive. The number of things that people have to do in the United States, international students, to study here is really high. And the burden is sufficiently high to be a deterrent to something which in many contexts is extremely valuable to the host country, the students, and the United States itself. To broaden the view screen, in the White House, I was in charge of paperwork and regulation for 4 years. And I am confessing, let's phrase it gently, to self, an incomplete success. I think that's a way of saying a failure on my own part, meaning when I left office, there was approximately 9 billion hours in paperwork burdens imposed on the American people. I'm not proud of that. It's now up over 11 billion hours. And this involves agriculture imposed on farmers who want to do things. It involves Social Security recipients. It involves food stamp recipients. It involves people who want to build things, construction companies. And whatever the optimal number is, it isn't 11 plus billion. Okay, here's the secret war that the United States has been waging in the last months. I say it's secret in the sense that it hasn't gotten attention. It's not hidden, but it's a war on sludge, which appears to be mostly bottom up. That it's not as if the White House has closely overseen it. It's that people in the Department of Health and Human Services, in the Food and Drug Administration, in welfare and other agencies have basically been cutting sludge with tremendous aggressiveness. They've been taking away interview requirements. They've been eliminating form filling requirements. They've been making things automatic that were formerly administrative burden pervaded. Much of this involves the programs that have been enacted in order to help people in the midst of the COVID crisis. Some of it involves access to healthcare, where there's telemedicine now more than there's ever been. Some of this involves ensuring that economic health goes to people who are desperately needy. And the motivation for this very impressive war on sludge is twofold. And I'm going to almost end by pointing out these two factors, which are signals that are like canaries in the coal mine about the immense importance of sludge reduction for the next months and years. The first point is the pandemic has concentrated the bureaucratic mind with respect to the costs and benefits of sludge. If it's the case to get food stamps, say you have to have an interview, maybe the bureaucrat says that's how we've always done it. Maybe it is helpful. An interview is not so bad, let's continue. But in the context of COVID-19, if an interview is either literally impossible because people have to stay at home, or is extremely costly because people are desperate, they need to get the food, then the cost-benefit calculus may shift. If there are form-filling requirements that are burdensome and pretty strong medicine, people might say, it's okay, we've always done it. But if those requirements prevent, let's say, tens of thousands of people from getting a benefit on which their life turns, then the bureaucrat will say, let's waive that for now, for sure. Second point, which isn't about concentrating the bureaucratic mind, it's about an awareness of the fact, and this is the most exciting finding in behavioral science in the last 10 years, in my view, it's the fact that the human mind has limited bandwidth, which is not an amazing finding itself, but which has the following implication. If you are old, sick, suffering from mental illness, lonely, or poor, you are going to be suffering from an incapacity to focus a lot on things outside of your immediate problem. So if you are sick, you want to get better or get through the day. If you are poor, you want to find money, given or manage as best you can without money. If those things are true, then sludge can be devastating, much more than the government official typically thinks. If people are suffering from depression or cognitive decline, then the cost of sludge may be near infinite. And bureaucrats, of which I was one, at various levels in the hierarchy are more intensely alert to that than they've ever been. The war on sludge is being waged in a kind of ad hoc way. My hope is that with respect to healthcare and financial need and licenses and permits, we're going to see it much more aggressive and sustained than it's ever been. But whether or not that's the case, sludge can be seen as an anti-nudge, doing the opposite of what a GPS device that is making it really hard for people to get where they have to and sometimes need to go. Okay, we've been talking a little bit academically. I haven't seen the numbers on how many people died in Massachusetts today, but if it's a good day, the number is going to be over 2. If it's a really good day, and under 10, that would be a great day. And those are human beings, and that's a good day. Human beings have lost their lives because of a disease whose aggressiveness is potentially to be mastered. The basic idea, kind of the organizing themes of the theme of these remarks, is under the umbrella of a single question, which is, what's the most precious commodity that human beings have? And the answer to that question is time. Let's find a way, shall we, to give people more of it? Thanks.
Thank you, Cass. I think this was very helpful to put things all together. I'm gonna start with a question that I have for you, and then start taking questions from the audience. Please feel free to raise your hand or just type the question in the Q&A. Cass, do you have any example of a nudge, or I guess of a nudge that didn't work, and that?
Yeah, sure. So there was a great study in Europe where they tried to nudge people to buy healthier bread, whole wheat, I think it was, and they redesigned some stores so the whole wheat bread was extremely visible and accessible, and the more high-calorie bread was available, but you had to do a little work to get it. And the hypothesis, which is vindicated by numerous studies, including studies of website design in stores, is if you decrease ease of accessibility and visibility, you're going to alter choices. That was the hypothesis. It had no effect. People got the bread, the high-calorie bread. They ignored the fact that it was a little harder to find. I think that's a profound, it's little, but it's a profound lesson, which is if people have an intense desire to do something, it's really hard to nudge them not to do it. They're going to find a way. And so the nudges that are really effective typically align themselves with what people already prefer, or they don't run strongly against what people want. So in New Zealand, the fact that the nudges have been successful is that the people either believed or are convinced that this isn't like bread that they hate. It's okay tasting bread.
All right, perfect. So I guess the conclusion, is there any other pointer besides if it's not very much against your preferences?
So nudges that fail tend to fall in 2 categories. One is they're inconsistent with people's strong and basically very hard to move values and preferences. So to nudge people to do something that they consider immoral, that's really hard. Or to nudge people to do something that they consider very expensive and not worth it, that's also really hard. That's kind of the beauty of nudges, by the way, that they're respectful of people's agency. It can also be a problem if people are doing something that harms others and they kind of really want to. It might be hard to nudge them not to. So that's category 1. Category number 2 is when there's somebody, it might be a bank, it might be an electricity provider who can supply a counter nudge. It might be a cigarette company. So there are a lot of nudges to discourage people from smoking, but cigarette companies are trying to nudge people to smoke. And they haven't been, let's say, extremely ineffective in that. The Federal Reserve has done a few things to try to protect consumers through nudges. And some of those have been incompletely successful because financial institutions have said, okay, you want to play that game? We can do it better than you can.
Right. I'm gonna share a question from Gustavo Velasquez, I think. So he's asking, could nudges be more useful for people in developing countries? and that they maybe have less access to education and then potentially make poor decisions. He's asking maybe of how to spend money and if there is any research to show how behavioral science works in this world.
Okay, so that's a great question. I think some of the most exciting work and opportunities are in developing countries, where the track record of nudges is great. So President of Rwanda is very well informed about nudging and behavioral science. He has a really good grasp of it, and he's used some of the strategies that behavioral science recommends to terrific effect in Rwanda. And some of the economic and other successes in Rwanda, which are dazzling to see their progress, are a testimony to his use of often transparency to try to encourage more success, let's say. In India, which I visited not terribly long ago, not recently, there's very strong use of behavioral science and nudging. And I'm going to give a slightly gross example, if you'll permit, which is the effort to eliminate open defecation has been pervaded by the use of nudging in behavioral science. And the data suggests that effort has been somewhere between impressive and spectacular. So some people think it's spectacular. It's been almost not believable success story in a short time. There are some data analysts who say it's actually more mixed than that. But even on the more mixed view, there's a lot of nudging to try to encourage people to use toilets. And this is associated, by the way, with sex equality. And the officials who are doing this are completely aware of that, because many of the women who are not using toilets are, it's my wife in the background, she knows a lot about this. Some of the women who haven't used toilets are vulnerable when they're going out by themselves. And so the developing world is one where a lot of this is happening, and we're going to see, very large gains as a result, as the local ingenuity gets attached to the basic ideas. Another
question from Jeremy Fagelson, who was your student of Elements of Law, 1988. He's asking if the effectiveness of the nudge is more or less, is stronger or not, depending on who gives it. For example, a president compared to a mayor or a governor. And if you have some thoughts.
Okay, so let's discuss some, shall we? So if people are automatically enrolled in green energy and they have to opt out, let's say coal is a little less expensive, that works, meaning that the increase in green energy use will be large. If at your employer you are using double-sided printing by default and you have to switch, it's highly likely that that's going to work. If when you buy food at the grocery store, there's a label that says, peanuts, don't eat this if you have a peanut allergy, that's going to work. So basically, the universe of nudges is not greatly affected by the identity of the nudger. Having said that, the question's a great one, because if you attach a particular person to the nudge whom you don't trust, either you think that they don't know what they're doing or that they are self-interested or malevolent, then it won't work. Then the likelihood that people will ignore it if it's, let's say, an information, or opt out if it's a default rule, increases. So that's kind of what I've just said is intuitive based on what we know about behavioral science. Stumbling to try to think of a case in which a nudge failed because of the identity of the nudger. And the fact that, I kind of do this for a living, so the fact that I'm stumbling to think of that suggests partly that my imagination is not as full as I wish, but probably that it's just not a pervasive problem. Though you could, if you wanted to make a nudge fail, you certainly could. If you said in a place in the US where people don't like President Trump says X, and that's your intended nudge, that's probably not a great strategy. We do know that if you can have a validator, let's call it, who's trustworthy, and that's happened in India with the policy discussed. They've attached it to Gandhi. That has been effective to attach it to Gandhi, which suggests if it were attached to someone, Hitler, probably wouldn't work so great.
Another question from Ander Caballero. He's asking if there are some applications for Sludge in the private sector, and if you can share some examples if that's the case.
Yes. So thank you for that. So the basic hope is that we'll see private sector institutions conducting Sludge audits where they see what their employees and what their customers have to encounter before they whatever. So I'll give a homely example just from Harvard, that there are a lot of forms that, this is not the number one problem facing America today, but there are a number of forms that Harvard faculty and students have to fill out that are very plausibly not justified by their benefits. And Harvard could easily cut the sludge. For a large employer, call it Toyota, to do a sludge audit with respect to its own employees and its own customers would be a really good idea. And while the concept of a sludge audit is new, it's only been around for about a year, it's gone viral in certain sectors where there are nudge units, as they're called, behavioral insights units in various parts of the world that are promoting sludge audits, including by the private sector. Now, it may be that, if you have local knowledge of a firm or company that you're associated with, if you just ask around about administrative burdens and paperwork, you'll get regaled with tales which cost money and time and morale. And we should see a lot of sludge reduction by large and small companies, some of it prompted by COVID-19.
Serge is asking that many of his friends, even highly educated, do not take the COVID seriously and socialize or don't wear masks in social settings. How can he nudge them?
Some data suggests that to focus on the risks that they're imposing on others is effective. So there's some data suggesting that people want to protect themselves, sure, but they don't want to endanger others. Now, he has to be credible. So if he says wear a mask in order to reduce the risk that you're going to be killing someone's grandparent, he has to be credible. There are stories out there about people who didn't believe that COVID-19 was real, who are now in the hospital and dead. That's grim. But to say, there's someone in Florida who thought this was a non-problem and they didn't do anything and they died yesterday. I just made up a story, but there are ones that are true. And the stories work better than statistics. Or to say you don't want to endanger your friend's parent who might die.
We have an interesting question from Fernando Marquez that he's asking if there is a way to nudge the government to exercise sludge.
Well, yes. So there are different governments who have different incentives. So the US government has a Paperwork Reduction Act, which I oversaw for 4 years. And the government is responsive to public objections to unwarranted sludge. So if people communicate with the relevant agency and say, this is causing real harm and it's not justified, someone will hear that even if you never learn that they hear it. They read it and they can't respond. It's too risky to respond. Then you're having a colloquy with someone and it might not be a good expenditure of your time. But it's read and it can cause reductions.
Rolly Cole is asking if your Sludge research finds any third-party benefits. She read a book on government requirements on small businesses back some time ago, and they learned that Sludge actually serves real needs of third parties. For instance, electronic medical records impose burdens on medical offices, but benefit insurance companies and researchers. What is your take on that?
Yes, so the optimal level of sludge is not zero. You could have application requirements, let's say, for health benefits, which are designed to promote program integrity, to ensure that people aren't receiving the benefits who don't deserve them. I've done some empirical work, by the way, very recently on how to trade off the fact that sludge A ensures that ineligible people don't get benefits, and B, ensures that some eligible people won't get benefits. Yes, the sludge will have both of those effects. And how should we think about something that ensures that no ineligibles could get it? That's good, but ensures that, let's say, thousands of eligibles don't get it. And America, my survey suggests, is willing to tolerate some ineligibles getting things, if that's the price paid to ensure that eligibles aren't deprived of things. Okay, so that's what program integrity is one thing. There's another thing about third-party benefits. Actually, it's a great question. There's a lot of different faces it has. So our tax system could be much more simple than it now is. Are you amazed to hear that? No. But I have something less obvious in mind, which is it could be automatic, where for a certain number of taxpayers, the government has your information. It could just send you a pre-populated tax form and say, here you go. Did we make any mistakes? If we didn't make any mistakes, we're going to send you a check, or you have to pay what we list. If you think we made us mistakes, tell us. You don't have to worry about it. That would drive the sludge of the tax return and the anxiety associated with it way, way down. But H&R Block and others, is H&R Block one that's still around, but the very TurboTax and others that are tax assistance types, they hate that. And they're third-party beneficiaries of sludge. They help people navigate the world of sludge, and eliminating sludge eliminates them. And so there are well-organized interests, let's say, who often fight against sludge removal efforts.
A question by Elizabeth Fisher, if there's a way to structure nudges for multicultural settings.
I'd love to hear more. So multicultural, let me free associate a little bit. Multicultural might mean different languages, and that's easy to handle. It might mean different cultural commitments. And if you have people who have different moral values, let's say, you might want to have diverse nudges that fit with their moral values, because it might work with one population but be offensive or incomprehensible to another. That's completely right. I mean, one frontiers issue, I wonder if you all will find this scary or exciting, probably both. We can have personalized nudges. So you could be nudged, and I'm talking to you, one of the 128 people on, you personally could be nudged with respect to COVID-19 or doctor's appointments or school or your job. You could get a nudge that's designed just for you, given who you are. And there's reason to think that personalized nudging is the wave of the future and likely to be effective. It's a little scary because it's requires the nudger to know a lot about you or to know some things about you that you might not want it to know. So there are obvious privacy issues. But in some cases, it's probably a pretty good idea. Like if you buy a car, you'll see a big sticker that'll tell you stuff about fuel economy and the money you can save and the environmental impact, but it's pretty bare bones. You can get personalized information if you go to a website, which will both tell you a lot more and enable you to figure out how it'll interact with your, let's say, amount of driving. You may not drive a lot, so your savings might be low, or you might be a crazy, intense driver, in which case the fuel-efficient car is going to save you a lot more money than is on the sticker.
Yeah, I'm gonna combine the questions by Sokmin and M. Marduk, Sokmin on. He was part of our lab as well, and from the Gen Ed class that you had, Cass. He would like to ask about wearing masks. Both of them have questions about wearing masks. The one is by Sokmin, how do you get people to wear masks even if their bandwidth has been used? And how do you recreate social norms of wearing masks so that you're not seen as that you're seen now as a rebel? And then what nudges would you suggest to counter the social norm of not wearing masks in the parts of the country that it's a problem?
Yeah. Maybe thing one is to attach mask wearing to the identity that people have. So something that would connect itself with don't mess with Texas. So I would even encourage authorities in Texas to contemplate connecting the don't mess with Texas idea with mask wearing and broaden the theme to that. So to connect with people's identity. The other thing is to have, let's call them surprising validators. That is, people in the relevant community who are trusted by the community, who are known to be like them and not people who are dismissible, who are mask wearers. They may be young people who are, really credible. I have a barking dog. He didn't like that idea very much, but I'm going to stick with it, even though he barked.
So in addition to that, there's a question by James Haggs that asks if people see mask as a political statement, is there some specific activity you can do for that?
No, that's a great comment. So here's something we haven't discussed, which is that actions have meanings, and the meanings are out of control of the actor. So I'm going to have to attend to my dog while I speak. My dog is extremely truculent right now. So the idea is if you wear a mask, or if you wear a tie, or if you wear go shirtless, you are making a statement of some kind, which may or may not be part of your intention. And the meaning of your action, I think this is a very important point which we tend to neglect. The meaning of your action operates sometimes as a subsidy and sometimes as a tax. So if I go into a class at Harvard with a bright shirt, let's say from the 1960s, the meaning of that will be basically I'm an idiot of some kind, or I'm trying to celebrate something, and that will not be my intention. So mask wearing in some parts of our country is subsidized by its meaning, like in Massachusetts, much of Massachusetts, and in some places it's taxed. I think that's instructive about how to counteract it. We need to switch in places where it's taxed, the cost of mask wearing socially to zero, or we need to make it into a subsidy rather than a tax. And if you think of the don't mess with taxes, I'm giving that example because it's very precise. It's both the slogan was successful and the campaign, which had a lot of trustworthy people in Texas. It was very personalized, like Willie Nelson saying, do this. And the question is whether we can identify, and the answer surely is yes, people in states where, or localities where people aren't wearing masks, people who will say on television or in posters, wear your mask, preferably with a smile and with a connection with the recipient audience.
Right, last quick question. If there's a confusion if sludge and red tape is the same or there's a conceptual difference, and then we're just gonna say goodbye to everyone. Thank you.
Okay, great. I think the term red tape has a degree of ambiguity in it. It's not clear offhand whether it refers just to paper. The word sludge is broader. So waiting time is sludge, time in line is sludge, having to go for an interview is sludge. Anything that's a friction that prevents you from getting something that a private or public institution generally would like to give you. A cooling off period is sludge. That is broader than red tape.
All right, thank you, Cass. Thank you everyone for joining. We'll have another talk related to nudges and social norms August 10th by Christina Buccieri. And Stuart, if you want to say goodbye and thank you to everyone.
Thank you all for joining. Cass, thank you. It was a wonderful speech, presentation, and answers to some pretty good questions there. I'm hoping that maybe we'll all get to reconvene in a year and do a post-mortem and identify which nudges, in fact, were successful, and perhaps how much sludge was removed and by whom. And maybe that'll provide us some guidance for future events such as the COVID-19 as to what works best and how do you attack it faster rather than the 4-month situation we're in now. So again, thank you all for joining. There will be more similar events. Look for announcements in your inbox. Back to you, Alki.
All right, thanks everyone. Cass, any final thoughts?
Just thanks to all, stay safe, and I would advise you to wear a mask because the person you admire most and trust most wants you to do that.
Thanks everyone.